So we developed, this is the pre-authorization form. Kind of, we had in mind that we had several cycles of approval. So each box here represents a workflow of approval, and a lot of times redundant data entry from box to box. So we started with a form that we called the freeze form, and it was like the exemption to our hiring freeze. And hiring freeze was always a term that was, sometimes it was just a cold period, but not totally frozen. So this form let people kind of ask for an exemption, ask for permission ahead of time. The form was paper, it would get lost, it would sit on people's desks for a long time. No one really knew where it was. Every college or division routed it differently, and there was no real oversight of who was giving approvals. If someone asked me centrally, like, who approved the freeze form for that thing, I'd have to go find the freeze form, look at it, and wonder whose signatures those were. So it was very much a typical paper process. And it was the first round of approval for a personnel action. So if you wanted to do a raise for somebody, you'd have to first go through this freeze form, and it would go see all these people and get approved. And then, or let's say in this case, it's a job listing. So you get a request for a job. You want to put a request to fill a job. And then the next step is we had a separate form that kind of verified and allowed you to update the job description that's outside of our recruiting system. So it was attached to the position number. And this allowed the opportunity to classify the job correctly, to do a job analysis, to make sure the job they're asking for is the job that the title that it really is. Not both campuses did not use it. And this form, while it was electronic, it went through a bunch of approval routing as well, and a bunch of duplicate data entry. Then once it was approved there, it would feed into our recruiting system, which is Taleo, and a job listing there gets a bunch of additional approvals, another whole workflow. And then when you select your candidate and you're going to hire them, you go to the hire EPAF and you enter all of that information again, and it goes through another set of workflow. So this was the state we had been living in for probably 10 years. So then in this project, we took the opportunity to clean that up some. So we still have some repeated workflow cycles, but that's been by request. So if the institution could stomach not seeing the same data over and over again, we can now reduce that if they wanted to. So the pre-authorization step one, this process is designed to say, put in all the information you want for the request, use PeopleSoft data instead of having to look at PeopleSoft and type it back into a paper form, a PDF. The PeopleSoft data initializes into the form, and then it routes for approval. And the information that's pertinent to a job listing, it gets integrated into Taleo's job listings. Now, the job listing still gets approved and goes through a workflow, but the data gets there in a more integrated way. Then once you've chosen your candidate and you're ready to hire them, you start a step 2 form that pulls in all the data that was improved on the step 1 form. So if they decided they're going to hire patient care representative 1 at $20 an hour, when they go to actually put a person in it, the form is programmed smart enough to not let them change the job title on the hire, because they have to hire what was approved, and they can't exceed the salary that was approved on the step 1 form. So it kind of does that policing for us that we were having to do manually before. And then when it executes, it updates both position and job data and keeps it in sync. It's a much more streamlined process than it used to be. People can use the features of the eForms, like seeing the routing, knowing whose desk it's sitting on, They can do all of that with this pre-authorization process, and they couldn't before. So this was a huge win for our users. And we got lots of good feedback about it. So Lynette's gonna walk us through a demo of that form.
Thanks, Marcy. I get to do the fun part, to show all the exciting things that are in PeopleSoft. Of course, Marcy, if you have anything you want to add as we go through, just let me know. So we're going to step through the pre-authorization form that Marcy described. You're going to see that whole process that unfolds in that very linear way within the forms, and see how quickly the users can go ahead and submit things. So the first thing is they have a tile that they can click on. It's the EPAF search page. They get some instructions on the page right when they click there, so they know how to proceed or what needs to be done. In order to start that new freeze process, there's really two ways that they can get into the form and start it. And there are also some avenues where they don't need that pre-authorization. And so over here, you can see there's links like hire new staff or hire new non-staff, because they also have that branching where non-staff, you can just hire people and there isn't the whole pre-authorization that goes with it. So the first way we'll show is using this Omni search at the top where they can enter information. We searched by name, Harry Potter. It gives us the list of all of the Harry Potters in the system. We can see some of them just have personal data. If some of them had a job and been terminated, here you can see that they're termed, or you could see their position details, so you can make sure you're picking the right Harry Potter. And then you get a list of actions based on your security as a user coming into this form, what you're able to do. And so if you don't have row level permissions for that person, maybe you can't update their job, but you could transfer them or something like that. So here we're going to say this first Harry Potter is the right one, and we want to do a pay FTE increase. So this is where for OU's process, they actually need to come in, and before they do a job change form to put that into PeopleSoft, they first have to ask and get permission to say, from a budget perspective, can I offer this to this employee type of thing? And then once it gets approved, then it flows through into the second form that actually updates job data. So here we can see, because we opened the form for Harry Potter, we can see Harry Potter's name up at the top, and it's populated with the information, like the type of request, because we picked it from the menu, the position number they're in, and job details throughout the form. But probably the more common way that we'll see people come in is they'll just go in and say, hey, I need a pre-authorization. They know that they want to post a job on Taleo for people to apply. And so this is that first step of saying, I would like to post a job. So they come in here and say, I want to fill a position because of a promotion or a transfer. I want to create 2 new positions. And then they can give us all of the attributes of that position. You saw they selected the job code on this form. That's going to be important for the second page, because we will inherit some attributes based on that job code that was entered. They can indicate things like, will there be a drug test required? Is there a driver's license check? What they want for their introduction on the job posting. The second page here, they have another form that manages at a job code level. They're using the non-person profile within PeopleSoft to track at a job code level what the essential duties are, the working conditions, qualifications, experiences, all of those things. And this was an enhancement that was made with this recent implementation as well, where it's really locked down. So at a job code level, you kind of have to have these things as part of your job posting. And it's controlled by the administrative office, but forms can be submitted to improve or make changes to that. And then these bottom 2 sections are all the person needs to fill out. So they can say if they're supervisor duties, and then the bottom section is for their any department specific things that they want to show up in their Taleo posting once that gets approved. Then the next page we come to will indicate what this FTE and standard hours are that they want for these new positions, and the proposed salary for those new positions. The bottom half that we're seeing here is the funding. So that's really where that pre-authorization for them is important, because someone has to say, how are you going to pay for this person if you do hire them, if we allow you to put it on Taleo and recruit. And so this isn't going out necessarily right now and changing funding, because someone could be in an existing position and you don't want to change it until you're moving the new person into the position. But you can search by combo code here. And you can also search by the account, the fund, org, all of those attributes that you see in a normal PeopleSoft screen when you're doing funding and picking the combo code. So we'll just pick the combo code here. But you can add additional rows. So you can split it 50-50 to say, well, I'm getting half of my funding from this location and I plan to get half my funding here, or you could split it. I think maybe we limited it to like 4 or 5 rows here. I was going to say up to 10, but I don't think we got quite that crazy. And then there's some additional questions that they have to answer. Is this going to increase the department's headcount? Is it grant funded? And then they have to provide some extra explanation so that as this is approved, they can justify or know where these costs are coming from. And then based on the setup and those selections that the user made throughout the form, various documents will be required based on what they've requested to have approved. So in this case, the person filling out this particular form has to upload 2 items, the justification and the org chart, before they proceed. And so we have just blank documents that we upload in place of these, but in the real world, they'll actually have to upload, and those would be the documents that would be reviewed as part of the request as well. And then once that's done, the user can submit the form, and then that starts that first level of workflow approvals. This is the most intense approval process for this particular one. Or this form, the pre-authorization and then the hire, because once they've entered stuff onto this form, we then lock it down in future steps. So not as many people have to approve, because they know that it will follow what was approved here. So you can see all the various workflow steps in here that it goes through. And as Marcy mentioned, a user can come back in at any point in time and see where their form is at in the approval process. So once that's completely approved, what happens is it goes out, and if it's a hire they were requesting to post, then it's out on Taleo. People can apply to that job. And once they identify an applicant, then they can come in here. So the first one I'm showing here is that if I know the person I want to hire and I know they're an internal person, maybe they're I posted the job and I hired internally, so I'm transferring them. I have that option to just come to Harry Potter and say, yep, I need to move Harry Potter into this position. I go and find my first pre-authorization form, search for it, pull them in. The second option is if you think it's a brand new person, and I say think because, with 3 campuses, it's very likely that maybe the Health Sciences Center doesn't know that the person they hired is an employee, even though they should probably tell you. And so they can just go, hey, I want to hire a new staff member. And when they click on that, they pull up that pre-authorization form that gave them the approval to post the job in the first place. And then the first thing that shows up is really kind of a search match to say, okay, give us the person you hired, give us their personal details. And at this point, we're doing another check just to make sure. So when we move to the next page, you'll see it gives us feedback to say, yep, this is a brand new social security number. You're right. This person doesn't exist in the system. When we complete this form, we'll create an EMPL ID for them. Alternatively, you might see something that says, this person already exists, so we picked the EMPL ID and put it on the form, and this is really a transfer. And so that people can be aware as they're hiring right away, oh, this person forgot to tell me that they already worked for OU in some capacity. As soon as we get that information in here, let's see, my slowly button isn't working. Then we come through and fill in the form. So you can see the data we completed on the prior page populated into here. We fill in all of the personal data details about the person that we've collected, their marital status, citizenship. There's military information here as well that can be filled in, and ethnicity as we go down. And this all creates and gets updated into PeopleSoft as the form is processed. So we'll enter their address here. And then they can either say that the mailing address is the same as home, or they can enter a new one as well. They can enter phone information for the person. And then at this point, they can save that personal data and create the EMPL-ID if they want. And then we move on to entering the job data. So this is where it's pulling some information from that first pre-authorization form, and it's populating it into here, and it's locked down. So you can see up at the top here, the position number is locked down because we said what position number it was when we got the funding. So people can't change it. They can't really make a mistake at that level. But there are some things that maybe could vary from the pre-approval, like the reports to, that's fine. Like we don't really care if people change that, or whether their time, if they're a punch time or a web clock or something like that, really varies once you hire the person and you work out those details. So they can make updates to some of that information. They can say where the person will work and then where they live while they're working there, and if they're telecommuting, and give some extra information about what needs to be done if there is any telecommuting. Here's where we can see that the proposed annual salary per position that we created. So we created 2, which means that we're just hiring one of those 2. We can hire a second, which would give us the second position number. But it was $40,000 at a 1.0 and a 40 FTE. So people can choose to have less, but they can't go over that. So if I come in and I enter my hourly rate and it indicates that the total compensation here would be more than $40,000, it stops me and says, yeah, there's a problem. You didn't get approved for that much money. So you have to then go back in and either decrease the amount, or they would need to go get another pre-authorization if they needed that amount of money more. They can add in some multiple components of pay here that total the salary at the bottom. We then go in and say the training that will be required for this person as they move into their new position, which can trigger those automated processes that assign trainings to people and ensure that they're completing them. So this is all just kind of going down, and OU specifically wanted to make people fill in every box so they wouldn't kind of autopilot click check all to yes or check all to no. And I think people maybe don't like not being on autopilot. And then the final page here is where if there needs to be Regents approval, their users know when Regents approval is required, so they can toggle that to yes, so it would route. They can upload any optional file attachments at this point as well, and then they can submit the form. So all of those forms that were all separate and individual, kind of 4 or 5 different processes floating around with all of their own workflow, they were also having to repopulate the form every single time they submitted it. And now at this point, it kind of just pulls it all through and makes it very quick for the end user, trying to minimize the number of clicks it takes or the things that they need to look up in the system and could potentially get wrong.